Hello, everybody. Welcome to GM Joel's Chess Week recap on ICC. Chess, being for the most part a non-physical sport, rarely requires players to play through injuries. But in the Champions Showdown in St. Louis, we saw that and more in an unusual kind of tournament. The showdown pitted 8 players in 4 arduous death matches. The top players contested games at different fast time controls: 5 minute, 10 minute, 20 minute, and 30 minute. Now, the match between Magnus Carlsen and Ding Liren started later than the others. I'll recap that one next week. The other 3 matches are completed and resulted in match victories for the American Big Three. Hikaru Nakamura has always been a speed specialist, and he had little trouble with Veselin Topalov. Hikaru jumped out to a huge lead, coasted for a bit, and then finished strong to win by a margin of 61.5 points to 30.5 points. There is some kind of complicated weighting scoring system used for the event, which I didn't really take the time to delve into, but Nakamura won an awful lot of games, and the bulge is even bigger with the scoring system. Now, any chances Topalov might have had were dashed by some frustrating losses in the 5-minute games. He let slip a winning position in the first 5-minute game, drifting into a lost rook ending, and we're going to have a look at that one. Okay, so c4 to start the game, but it transposes into a Queen's Gambit. a3, kind of an interesting waiting move, as black is planning c5, so white can have b4 ready. But really kind of transposes. Rook a2. Well, that's an interesting sort of move in a different position, but in another Nimzo. In a Nimzo Indian, Bareyev once played that type of move against me to play b4, but also it worked out quite well for me in the end. So he's ready to play b4. Something has to go back. But of course, rook on a2 is not entirely ideally placed. But as the game goes, Nakamura gets himself into a situation where he has to give up the exchange after bishop a6. And he had some tactic prepared, hoping that this would work out well for him. Now, it seems that white can take this bishop, move the queen, and then take the knight. We get some position like this at the queen a6, 2 pawns for peace. White has some trouble castling. According to the computer, white should do it, but certainly there would be some play there for black. So Topalov decided easier way out. But with the pawn for the exchange, black is doing okay because the knights really have a nice grip on a lot of squares. So this position is actually fairly even, and Topalov decides to give back the exchange, but still the knight is not really worse than the bishop. And it's pretty even for a while. Knight e5, and okay, offering trade of queens, queen a6, and I think now probably Nakamura should have played rook c6, with the idea that if queen a4, he has a very effective move in rook c1, which forces trade of rooks, and it's just a completely even position. The queen doesn't have to go to a4, but if it goes back to e2, it's black is out of any danger. White started to get a little pull after knight c4, rook b1, as he's kind of penetrating there on the queen side. The knight is not real well placed on b6. Now white bishop comes into the game, and pretty soon Topalov is winning this game. f4, okay, blocks off that diagonal. He can shield his king on h2. and Nakamura decides to sacrifice a pawn. Topalov takes it. Nakamura is going for some counterplay, queen c3. But in this position, I think that he could just take this pawn on e6 with the rook. Rook takes e6, and what didn't he like? Well, if queen d2, well, I can just come back queen f1 to defend. The queen will come back out again later. It's up a couple of pawns. So that was a simple way to play, but maybe Topalov thought that rook check would be even better because the king goes h7, then the queen takes on e6. And after king f7, though, now it's actually getting kind of tricky. I think that white has to play the move queen a4 to maintain the real advantage. The queen, of course, is looking at e8, setting up mating nets. But another factor is that if queen takes e3, you can throw in a check, and then next move, take the rook on c2 and be completely winning. So queen a4 was the most accurate move. Strangely enough, after rook b7 check, king f6, now the position actually rates as equal because well, for one thing, black has a threat to play rook g2 and make a perpetual. So Topalov tried queen a8, and here Nakamura can play rook takes g2, and he has perpetual check, king takes queen d2, and so on. But Nakamura is such a combative player that he decided to go for it with king f5 instead. And this, technically speaking, is should come out better for white. Rook queen f8, king e4, rook takes, queen takes. But now Topalov just loses it. He needs to play queen b4 check, and he maintains an edge. He's got some initiative. If king f5, rook f7, king g6, rook f8. White is still on top. F5 check, I think, might be a threat now. If rook c4, if rook c4, queen b1 check, say king d4, queen b8 is possible. And in this position, although it's gotten a lot less clear because the d pawn is a potential threat for black, still black has to take care of his king. White has an edge. But, well, Topalov just played queen f6, just allowing black to trade queens, and then suddenly this ending, the pawns are even, but black has two connected passed pawns in the center supported by his king. This is completely hopeless for white, just instantly hopeless. The pawns run in, supporting each other, with the king supporting them. Basically, there's nothing white can do. He tries to take the h-pawn. Okay, the rook stops one pawn. He's got two pawns, and that's that. So Topalov going from winning to losing very quickly in that game. And of course, that happens in fast games, but it happened especially a lot in this tournament. In the eighth blitz game, Topa had an extra piece in a simple end game, just completely simple. Knight and bishop against knight with two pawns each. He hallucinated, dropped a piece. Then he had an ending with even pawns, and he managed to even lose that. That game highlights a strange and controversial organizational decision to play without any increment or delay, or time delay. Now, there's been quite a public response. The handful of old school fans taking it was good enough for all of us in the old days kind of position. Like I walked 5 miles through the snow and I liked it. But I think that most people, myself included, are puzzled by the move not to incorporate improvements in the game that technology has brought us. Now, I remember the days of the Friday night rapids at the Old Manhattan Chess Club. All the scrambles I had with Jimmy Sherwin, clocks banging, pieces bouncing, often seeming more like basketball than chess. Even the slightest of increment avoids that kind of mess. It would have been nice to have it in the old days. We would have had a lot fewer fights. In some of the games in St. Louis, players found themselves in a hopeless situation because they were low on time and they just had no way of ending the game in a short number of moves. So they just not being able to replenish the clock at all, and they just lost. So it hardly seems like a way to do justice to games between such exalted grandmasters. Okay, on to Caruana Grishuk, in which the American who is least comfortable at fast time controls managed to overcome a deficit with a strong finish. He started his comeback at the end of the Saturday session and completed on Sunday, winning with a less comfortable than it looks 49-43 margin. Let's look at a nice game where Fabiano unleashed a sudden decisive attack. Okay, so in this game, Caruana opens with c4, and it leads to a position that can come about in many different ways. This from an English move order, can come out of a Queen's Gambit Tarish type thing, and a lot of these positions can also come about from a Panov attack in the Caro-Kann. Especially if black takes on d4, those isolated pawn positions, they come about from different openings. So there's certainly useful things for chess players to know. In this game, Grishuk avoids getting to the isolated pawn. He sets up a hanging pawn position. Well, potential hanging pawn position if white played c4, but he never does. So. I check. It's not totally clear that it's useful to put the king on h8, but it looks cool doing it. And the bishop moving allows white to play e4. The bishop can also go to b2. It's not clear in this type of position what to do, but of course the bishop on b2 doesn't really work until black takes on d4. So since he hasn't done that, this makes more sense. And it's looking at that pawn on h6. So the queen shifts so that it can maybe go in front of the bishop. And so it's been very normal up to this point, but suddenly this bishop f6 is a major error, and this kind of thing can sneak up on you in the fast games. And suddenly Caruana unleashes an attack. He gets e5 with tempo, which is very important. It might not be a good move if black gets a free one, but he has time to advance to follow up with bishop h6. And black can't take it because queen a4 setting up the battery is no good defense to queen h7. So Grishuk cannot take it. He plays knight takes d4, trying to open up the bishop. Knight takes d4 to bring the queen out. And now he takes the bishop. If he takes the knight, queen h5, g6, and now queen h3, setting up discovered chess, king g8, and bishop g6. White has a winning position. For instance, if takes, check, king h7, or king h8, queen e7, is easy for white. But now the rook left, rook d3, and that's coming over. Okay, so let's say he doesn't take on g6. Queen takes e5, bishop check. White can use this motif very nicely. King h8. Bishop comes back, threatening a nasty discovery. King g8, rook e1, driving the queen. Queen f6. And now we can come back to h7. King h8, and bishop e4. And white threatens again discovery, winning the queen, and also bishop, so it picks up a piece. So that would be a nice little variation there. Okay, so he took the bishop, and queen h5. So to queen h5, white threatening queen h6, and various mates, queen and bishop type thing. If king g7, white's is going to take on e6, and queen g6 check, and it's not difficult to see that's going to be pretty strong. So bishop g5, and white just attacks the bishop, trying to get rid of it. What can black do? If bishop f4, try to keep the bishop, queen f7 is a crusher because it threatens mate on h7, but also threatens now, oops, I went too far, to take the bishop. So then we can see bishop takes rook, white takes back, threatens a queen h6, king g7, knight e6, takes, check, and now white just kind of cleans up everything. Check, and black, I'm not sure where the king has to go. He wants to try to avoid a check with the bishop. And so white actually would like to get the queen to h7, because king f8, bishop g6 would be decisive. Right? And we'll see how that works. Bishop g6, rook c7. Okay, it's a long variation, but it's kind of cute. So queen g7, king e6, bishop f5. This is not actually necessary to mate, but it's kind of cute. King e4, queen f3 check, king takes, rook e1 check, bishop e4. Let's bitter end it. Rook takes e4, king d5, or king d6 is similar. King d6, queen f6 mates, or rook e7, discovered check, king d6, queen f6. Okay, nice little king hunt, just for the fun of it. Okay, so Grishuk played queen takes g5, avoiding mate, and that was just kind of prosaic because he just played knight f3 with an extra piece for just a couple of pawns, no serious compensation for black, and Caruana was able to win easily after that. All right, on to the last match. Wesley So had to wipe out the largest deficit in order to defeat Lenier Dominguez of Cuba. At one point, down 16 points in the mixed scoring portion, So came out of the gate in the 5-minute portion with 4.5 out of 5 to turn the tables. Dominguez wasn't quite done yet and won a nice miniature. We're going to take a look at that game next. Okay, so in this game, excuse me, Dominguez e4, and we have a Petrov. So Wesley So trying to cool things here, with the lead, finally having the lead. But Dominguez, okay, he plays knight c3, which is what the most grandmasters play when they want to win, because it often leads to queenside castling, opposite side castling. Wesley So decides to go back and play with a slightly passive position, and Dominguez, I think, rather smartly sets up the castle queenside. What have you got to lose? But also, I think it's like it's a smart way to try to take advantage of advantage in space you have, and maybe a little bit of mobilization, because to try to get a wing attack on the king. Now, So plays bishop f5, and maybe that move is slightly controversial because the bishop becomes a target and enables black to play for this wing attack, although it looks sort of normal as it comes out. Castles, and maybe he was playing knight e4, but he didn't go through with it here. Knight d7, and now he doesn't get another chance for that. Bishop g6 and h4. So he's trying to take advantage of that bishop. Black plays rook e8, and then boom, another pawn comes forward. And here Wesley plays h6, and soon after this he gets flattened. It's an instructive moment. A lot of people in a lot of games have gotten crushed by a wing attack when they create a target like that enables the opponent to open lines over there. Now, it wasn't so easy to meet this move, but it's, perhaps slightly paradoxical that the better choice was probably to go h5, to go 2 boxes. And even though this immediately confronts the pawns and enables white to open lines, it actually leaves black in a little bit safer position. The bishop on g6 is still in a position to clog up the king side. So not an easy decision to make quickly, but h6 things go pretty smoothly for black now. It takes, and he pushes h5, and he pushes g5. It all just kind of flows through. And maybe Wesley thought at first that he would have some resource here, but black doesn't really have any ideas involved with moving the knight and exploiting bishop takes g5, because knight moves allows queen takes f7 check. So after d5, Dominguez kind of smartly gets the king out of there. Now just removes a defensive piece, puts another attacker, and then he's going to get this rook. It's just position too open, too many attackers, and no counterplay. So white is pretty much rolling. It's a desperation situation. Knight e4. He takes it with the knight. He doesn't even necessarily have to take, but he does. And after pawn takes e4, okay, this is a white to play and win type of situation. My first thought was queen takes g7 check. Bishop takes, pawn takes. And this does, in fact, win. After f5, okay, direct against rook h8 mate. Now bishop c4 check, queen d5 is not the most clear. Actually, simpler is to check and take the rook first, because now the queen has to take. And now you can give the bishop check, and after the king moves, you make a queen, and white comes out with an extra piece. So this is showy and simple and definitely winning, but maybe Dominguez did even better because he simply played queen f5, and there's just no defense to white's threats. He has lots of threats, one of them being simply hg, followed by a sacrifice on g7 or rook h7, or queen h7 and queen takes bishop, and h7 check. Everything's in the air, basically. Now, Wesley So played rook e6, and then he decided to resign, as white can win in a whole bunch of different ways. One way that he added with his queen f5 was to check and play queen f7, and there's no good defense to queen g8, because if you move the bishop, then it's mate on g7. But I think even nicer than that would be queen h7. So maybe this is like the Nigel Short's opponent resigning before the double onto promotion. Queen h7. This would be nice. Yeah, hg with discover check. And now either rook h6, white queens and mates, or king g8, rook h8 mate. So some cuteness at the end for Dominguez. Now Wesley So won the game after that to stretch out the lead again. And then came the 10th game, and everything kind of turned surreal with that game. And now, just on the board, it was a topsy-turvy game, and we're going to look at that next. But then there's a little bit of drama after that, which we'll get to. So first, the 10th game, Dominguez against So. Okay, so this time So goes for Caro-Kann. I'm not going to focus too much on the opening, but I think there may be something a little bit experimental in here. G6. I don't know if that G6 is a way to play. I didn't really look up this opening, but somehow Dominguez is not attentive enough to his E5 pawn. Maybe he needed to play rook E1 quicker, and he just gets taken off. Okay, this happens when you're rushing. So Wesley So takes his pawn. Well, maybe Dominguez thought there'd be a follow-up, but after f6, everything just gets defended. And pretty soon the position is basically consolidated. And the knight will go back, and then the pawns will come forward. So black is just up a center pawn, but Dominguez manages to create some counterplay with a queenside majority and two bishops. And So plays a little bit uncertainly, but he eventually finds a place for this knight, and it looks good here. But then he plays a little bit sloppy around here, allows white to play b5, and then b6, and keep an eye on that pawn, right? And now, for some reason, So plays knight takes h3, which is not a good decision. He could play instead g5 or queen f5, and he maintains a definite advantage with those two pawns in the center. After knight takes h3, one reason it's not so good is that white doesn't even have to take it. He can play a simple move like rook f1 even, and black has a lot of things hanging. So according to the engine, white has many ways to have an advantage after knight takes h3, which was not the situation before. But he takes the rook, check, and takes, and now suddenly black has a problem with this b pawn coming forward. He plays knight e3. I think maybe d3 was a better try because pawn is suddenly unstoppable. Knight takes c4, and now white puts a second queen on the board. So desperation situation. So tries to complicate with d3. All right, clock's getting very low now. Dominguez misses rook takes e4, which is a cruncher. The rook is pinned, can't take. Rook can't really take the queen because then there's going to be back rank mate. So basically the black position just falls apart. So after d3, Dominguez goes for simplification. And it looks like it probably should be trivial, but it turns out not to be. And now a very interesting moment. Dominguez plays queen e2 because he figures this is the most solid defense. But he needed to actually play king f1 because the white queen keeps the black queen from getting on the f file. And so white is able to blockade and not let black gain momentum. The funny thing is that after queen e2, queen e4, black already has even though he's a rook up. And in fact, things even got worse for him. So he's looking to sacrifice a piece. G3, he's trying to kind of make a little bit of luft. And, well, he might have gotten out of this, but Wesley So now kind of tricked him with queen g4. And what both players missed is white can simply take. And you look at it on the computer and you say, takes, pawn takes, queen, king, f1. It's pretty simple, right? I don't know. I have a feeling that both players might have overlooked the fact that e2 check is not working because queen takes bishop is check on the king. Otherwise, black could take the rook and make a queen and then make a second queen. But this is check, so white could just simply take the queen. Instead, king f1, and now black is actually winning as he gets rid of this last pawn in front of the king. And now, in fact, almost any move by black leads to a winning position. This is one of those things where if you stop running, you realize that your opponent can't do anything. The best that white can do is to try to sacrifice on d2, which is not very effective. So black could, for instance, take the pawn on c5, and white can't even try to sack the bishop because queen h3 is just gonna win everything. There's just no good answer to that. If queen g2, e2 check, and that costs the queen. But instead, Wesley So just instead of playing bishop c5, he checked, and he actually just gave a perpetual check. I guess maybe better safe than sorry because he was kind of cementing the lead. But also another issue in this game was that somewhere along the line in all that pounding, Wesley So opened up a blister on his hand, and it produced a rather icky blood on the clock situation. Now, the bloody clock may not become as legendary of a sports moment as Curt Schilling's bloody sock in the World Series, but it sure is something you don't see every day. So a little bit of a crazy, surreal situation on top of all the, you know, crazy messing around, in all these blitz situations, trying to figure out what to do with no time, and a little bit of an extra little bit of interest in there with this very strange situation. So it's a lot of strange and interesting chess played in St. Louis, though, in my opinion, they would improve the event, first of all, by instituting increment in the games. I just don't like this situation where one side is winning with any kind of normal moves and they just run out of time, or it's a draw and one player runs out of time. And perhaps they could shorten or simplify the schedule, because I'm not even too sure exactly what was going on with so many games and so many time controls. I think it was a little bit of overkill in that sense. I mean, I think you want to try to make everything kind of understandable when you bring together such elite players to play against each other. All right, that does it for this week. I'm Grandmaster Joel Benjamin. I hope you enjoyed the show, and I hope you will join me next time on GM Joel's Chess Week Recap on ICC.